These mothers have committed the most grievous offenses in U.S. history. Number 3 in this video is the most unbelievable. The first on our list is Susan Eubanks, the mother who killed to revenge her family. She was a mother of 4 boys, and for a while, that's all she seemed to be. To neighbors, Susan Eubanks looked like a tired, overwhelmed mom who was worn out from life's demands. But behind closed doors, the signs were there. She was angry, and then, one October night, she did something terrifying. That evening, Susan Eubanks loaded a .38 caliber revolver and walked into her son's bedrooms one by one. Susan shot each of them in the head. Then, she turned the gun on herself and pulled the trigger, but she survived. This woman killed her 4 sons, an act that is worse than monstrous. Brandon, just 14, was the oldest. He was funny, responsible, and already starting to act like a man. Austin, only 7, was shy and sweet, always clutching his stuffed animals. Brigham was 6 and as the talkative one who was full of energy. And Matthew, the baby, he was only 4 years old. In a span of minutes, their laughter, their dreams, and their futures were silenced by their own mother. You won't believe what caused this monstrous act. The night of the murders, Susan left behind a note. Scrawled in handwriting that reeked of bitterness, it read, "If I can't have my children, then nobody can." Susan had been spiraling. She had a history of alcohol abuse, mental health struggles, and a violent temper. In the months leading up to the murders, her relationship with her boyfriend, who was also the father of 2 of the boys, had turned volatile. There were fights, accusations of infidelity, and threats. She felt abandoned and powerless. She had lost custody of her eldest son, Brandon, only to get him back briefly. And in a final act of control or revenge, she made a decision that would shock even the coldest heart. When police arrived at the Eubanks home in San Marcos, California, they found a scene that scarred even seasoned officers. The silence in the house was unbearable. Each child lay in their bed, as if sleeping except for the blood and the stillness. Susan, bleeding but alive, was rushed to the hospital. She recovered physically, but emotionally, morally, and legally, there was no recovery. She was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She now sits on death row at the Central California Women's Facility, awaiting a fate she denied her own children. Next is Melissa Lucio. She was the first Latino woman sentenced to death in Texas. Most interesting, she was a mother of 14 children. Lucio was accused of beating her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah, to death in Texas. Lucio's daughter died of head trauma, and authorities claimed the child was abused. However, Lucio has long maintained her innocence. The toddler was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Her small body was covered in bruises from her head to her toes. An autopsy would later reveal that she had suffered a blunt force head trauma and other injuries, including a fractured arm and a possible bite mark. The police suspected abuse, and just hours after her daughter's death, Melissa was brought in for questioning. Alone, exhausted, grieving, and under intense pressure, Melissa faced 5 hours of aggressive interrogation. The investigators insisted she was responsible for Mariah's injuries, and eventually she admitted. Melissa had a long history of trauma. She grew up in poverty. She was sexually abused from a young age. She endured abusive relationships, and by the time she was in her 30s, she was struggling with depression, addiction, and the impossible task of raising a large family with little support. But the prosecution didn't focus on that. They painted her as a violent, unfit mother who was cold and remorseless. They used her subdued, flat demeanor during the interrogation and court proceedings as evidence of guilt, ignoring the well-documented symptoms of trauma survivors. There was no direct evidence that Melissa physically abused Mariah. No eyewitnesses. No prior history of violence toward her children. Yet, in 2008, a jury found her guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to death. For years, Melissa sat on death row, largely forgotten by the world. But her story didn't end there. In 2010, advocates, legal experts, and even celebrities began raising their voices, saying her case was a grave miscarriage of justice. They argued that Melissa had been coerced into a false confession, that Melissa's trauma was used against her and she was not understood. And then, in 2022, just days before her scheduled execution, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a stay. They ordered a review of new evidence that might prove what Melissa had been saying all along, that she did not kill her daughter. As of today, Melissa Lucio remains alive, but her future hangs in the balance. She is still on death row, still waiting, still fighting. The next is Lisa Montgomery. Lisa Montgomery murdered Bobby Jo Stinnett, a pregnant woman, and cut the baby from her womb in Skidmore, Missouri. Posing as a bear of a dog, Montgomery strangled Stinnett and kidnapped the unborn baby, intending to raise it as her own. The baby survived and was safely recovered. Lisa Montgomery was the first woman to be executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years in 2021. On December 16, 2004, she had killed Bobby Jo Stinnett, was 23 years old, 8 months pregnant, and happily married. Jo Stinnett bred rat terrier puppies and had arranged to meet a woman she knew only online as Darlene Fisher, a potential bear. The two had exchanged emails and bonded over their shared love of dogs and upcoming motherhood. But Darlene, as she posed, wasn't who she claimed to be. She was Lisa Montgomery, a 36-year-old woman from Kansas. And she didn't just want a puppy, she wanted a baby. Lisa showed up at Bobby Jo's home under the guise of picking up a dog, and when she got there, she strangled Bobby Jo with a rope until the young mother collapsed to the floor, unconscious and gasping. Then, using a kitchen knife, Lisa performed a crude, agonizing C-section, cutting into Bobby Jo's abdomen and stealing the unborn child from her womb. Bobby Jo died slowly in a pool of blood. Lisa took the newborn girl, cut the umbilical cord, cleaned her up, and drove home. She called her husband, claiming she had gone into labor while out shopping and had just given birth. For 24 hours, she showed off the baby, posting online and welcoming visitors. But it didn't take long for authorities to track her down. They had traced her online communications with Bobby Jo and arrived at her home the next day. The baby girl, miraculously, was alive. She was returned to her father. Lisa was arrested and charged with federal kidnapping resulting in death. Lisa Montgomery's lawyers begged for clemency in later years, claiming she had a severe brain damage and was traumatized. Her sister spoke out. Even United Nations experts and human rights organizations condemned the decision, but in the early hours of January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was strapped to a gurney inside the Terre Haute Federal Prison in Indiana. Her final word was, "No." Then, at 1:31 a.m., the lethal injection was administered. She was pronounced dead at 1:34 a.m. Lisa Montgomery didn't kill out of hatred or vengeance. She killed from a place of deep psychosis and delusion. She was a child who was raped, beaten, and silenced. A teenager who was sold off to her abuser. A mother who lost control of reality. That doesn't make her crime any less tragic. But it makes the question more complicated. Do we punish people for what they do, or try to understand why they did it? Next is Darlie Routier. Darlie Routier was convicted of the brutal stabbing deaths of her two sons, 6-year-old Devin and 5-year-old Damon, in their home in Rolette, Texas. Darlie claimed an intruder committed the murders and attacked her as well. However, investigators found inconsistencies in her story and evidence suggesting the crime scene had been staged. Darlie called 911 in a panic. She was screaming, out of breath, bleeding. She said an intruder had broken into their home and stabbed her two sons, Devin and Damon, while they slept. She claimed she tried to fight him off, that he escaped through the garage. By the time police arrived, 6-year-old Devin was already dead. 5-year-old Damon died moments later, in the arms of paramedics. Darlie herself had deep cuts on her arms and throat. But within days, the nightmare twisted, but this time with Darlie as the villain. Investigators noticed odd things. The screen where the intruder supposedly entered was barely cut. A kitchen knife matching the boy's wounds was found in Darlie's own sink. There was no evidence of forced entry, but only Darlie's story. And then came the infamous footage 8 days after the murders, at her son Devin's gravesite. Darlie was caught on camera laughing, chewing gum, and spraying silly string while singing happy birthday to her murdered child. Prosecutors claimed Darlie killed her sons to relieve financial stress. That she staged the crime scene injuring herself for sympathy. That she was a cold, calculated killer who wanted freedom from motherhood. In 1997, just 1 year after the murders, Darlie Routier was found guilty of Damon's death and sentenced to death. Darlie has sat on Texas death row for nearly 3 decades. Her supporters argue that she was unfairly tried in the court of public opinion and then condemned in a courtroom based on emotion, not proof. Appeals continue. DNA testing continues, and the debate rages on.